And we're live. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Solvable Mysteries podcast. My name is Juras. As every week, I'm joined by Glenn Highcove. How are you feeling, man, on this Friday evening?
Man, I'm doing all right. It's been super hot. I feel like summer came early for us here. It's been like I think it was like 37 degrees Celsius, which is I think like 97 degrees Fahrenheit today. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. We got like a drought year. It's super warm, but yeah, I'm actually really excited tonight. It's funny. This is a case we're going to talk about that. I mean, I know even I think before I started doing the show with you, I had heard something about it and kind of it was one of those things that would top up like show up on other people's videos, and then people have been asking us about it. So it's pretty cool that we're finally gonna. I think we're in the right place to tackle
Yeah,
it.
exactly, man. In respect to the weather, it's actually the complete opposite here. Like we literally had like snow just like the other day. So and it's crazy. I mean, we never have snow, during this time, but apparently the weather is changing. So let's go in. Let's do it. So today we're gonna be talking about a case that's been quite heavily suggested, and I've seen this come up, especially in our YouTube comments, quite often. And the commenters, they definitely one of the guys who commented made a really funny comment. The tribe has spoken, so we have to fulfill the wishes of our podcast tribe. So we're doing the Yuba County Five case today. It's a fascinating case. It's been dubbed the American Dyatlov Pass. It happened a little bit later than the actual Dyatlov Pass incident, but it's definitely mysterious. And I will say, I find it even more creepy than the Dyatlov Pass itself. And I can't wait to get into all of that. For the introduction into the case, I think we already have decided that you want to bring us into it. So have at it, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it's a perfect intro in terms of it being America's Day Out Loud. I heard a couple other shows mention that. I even looked to see if there was a Dr. Grande on that because if eerily, we and Dr. Grande seem on like extremely parallel paths where either we'll do videos right next to each other, like right before each other, or I mean, he even just covered Chris Kremers, I think, like the other week, and Lizanne Froon. That was a pretty interesting take he had on it. That makes me want
Yeah.
to makes me want to do another episode again, even though I know we've done it a lot. So TBD. But yeah, so I think this case is interesting to me specifically for a couple of reasons. I think one is it's one of those disappearance cases that shows how in some ways some things are exactly the same. So even though this is back in the 70s, um, there's a lot of things that are like really similar to how life is now. But then I think I know you actually mentioned this when we talked about a key point of some of the theories was that in some ways it's very different. So this is an era where literally nobody had cell phones. Like the only, I mean, you would have to be like Howard Hughes or somebody, like who was kind of like that era's version of Bill Gates. You would have to be like in the military or something to have anything. Basically, cell phones back then were radios, and nobody really had that. So, like, this is one of those things where, like, case in point, if you wanted to use the phone and you weren't home, you were either using the phone and like you were using the phone in like a business or you were using a payphone. And I think you mentioned that you hadn't ever even used a payphone, I think,
Yeah,
before. Was that right? I
I
mean,
think
wow.
so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of true. I mean, now people are like, where are there even payphones now? I'm sure there are some at the airport or something, but yeah. So I mean, just case in point, there's things like that. There's no GPS. Literally, not even really the military had GPS at this point. So if you were going to navigate, like at least here in the states or in California, you were using something called Thomas Map Guide, which was like a book of maps that you try to navigate around, or you'd have like a huge map that you would like try to fold out in the car. Like basically, the thing was you were basically kind of trying. If you didn't have somebody traveling with you, you were trying to navigate out and if you didn't have someone to navigate for you, you were trying to like basically memorize the map ahead of time and kind of figure out like where you were going to go. So it was easier to get lost, I guess is another way to put it. Way easier. Um, I think the other thing that's interesting about this case to me is that you have a group of people where like 80% of them, I mean, really 100% of them had some kind of mental issue. Um, 4 out of the 5 had moderate to significant or even almost severe levels of mental impairment. So from that perspective, it's I guess it cuts a little bit close to home because I have my wife's brother actually has Down syndrome, and when he's lived with us, it's given me kind of a better idea of sort of like both the things that people can do and can't do under, I would say, kind of similar circumstances, even though nobody in this case had Down syndrome. As an aside, I'll mention that it is kind of interesting to think that, because of changes in how changes in the environment, changes in food, changes in like no more lead in gasoline, things like that, you had probably a lot more mentally handicapped people back then than now, if that makes sense. You know what
Okay.
I mean?
Um,
Like people are more aware. Like you're not supposed to drink when you're pregnant. You're not supposed to smoke when you're pregnant. You're not supposed to use lead paint on your house, things like that. So it's kind of fascinating to think that there were a lot more people. Like a case in point, two of the people we're going to talk about today were considered quote unquote slow learners. And there's also, here's the other thing, they didn't know as much about things like autism, Asperger's syndrome, things like that. So it's interesting to wonder, like,
yeah.
how much more we know now about what maybe some of these people had. But I guess the other thing is that I guess that's where it's a really sad story because you have a group of men who, despite these enormous challenges in their lives, had managed to find each other and really kind of find things to be happy about in life. You know what I mean? In a life where maybe you have some limitations and some of these other things aren't going to happen for you, they were able to kind of, find social company and get together. So that's, I think, kind of the backdrop or the foil to this case is that's the real tragedy. You have, this case of these 5 men
Mm.
who I mean, literally, these 5 men had a really nice day coming ahead of them. Had this thing not happened, they had a really exciting thing that they were going to go do. So, yep, okay, that's my little preamble for the case today.
Yeah, I mean that's excellent actually because I didn't know like the fact that I mean I'm not sure if it's fact, but I will believe you for sure that maybe there were like more handicapped people back in the day because the information about what you should do during a pregnancy was not widespread, I would say, and I mean it correlates with other things from back in the day like the really funny like commercials that for say cigarettes will help protect against cancer and things like that. I mean I think that
Oh my
happened.
God.
Yeah, I think those were like even way back before this case. I want to add the timestamp. This case happened in the late 70s. We're talking about the night of February 24th 1978. A quick backstory here is that 5 men, they are referred to as boys by their family members. That's I don't really feel comfortable saying that they were boys because they were quite old. So we have Gary Mathias, who was 25. He was the only one who didn't have any mental handicaps, but he had developed schizophrenia because he was addicted to drugs during his service in the military while he was stationed in Germany. We have Bill Sterling, who was 29. He had some sort of an intellectual disability, as well as Jack Hewitt, who was 24. We have, who also had intellectual disabilities, Ted Weiher, who was the oldest one. He was 32. He was quote unquote slow learner. I'm looking at the notes. And then we have Jack Madruga, who was 30, who was the driver. He was the one who was driving his vehicle during this whole ordeal. One thing to mention off the bat, he was really proud of his vehicle and he would not let anyone else drive it. And they were basically Gateway Gators, a basketball team, you know, like some sort of, and they were competing to get into the uh, Paralympics or something like that. I mean, and one of the games, they were supposed to play was on Saturday, but on Friday, right before the game, they decided to go and see, their favorite basketball teams. I believe it was some sort of a college team. It was UC Davis basketball team, and they were going to see them play in Chico, in the city. And for everyone who's watching this on the YouTube channel, you could definitely check the map right now that we're showing. So, as I've said, they lived in Yuba City and they actually drove to Chico to watch the basketball game. Now, they did see the basketball game because later on in the vehicle that was found, they did find the tickets. So, they did go there and they were last spotted. Well, one other sighting of them is pretty credible. We will get into it shortly. In Chico, in some grocery store, and they were buying snacks at 10 p.m. in the evening. And after that, no one seen them ever since. And, I want to jump after this particular timestamp. I want to immediately jump to a man called Joe Shones, who, where we will start the mysterious story off from his account. But before I do that, dude, anything you want to add? Did I forget something?
No, I think that's a good breakdown. Yeah, to your point, UC Davis is one of our University of California schools here, and that's like by no means a big team, but it's sort of adorable in a way that this was like the exciting thing. This is what they wanted to do. This was their hobby. Apparently, sports was all they talked about when they were together. So like this was really probably a pretty exciting outing. Apparently, they were so excited about that big game that they didn't want to mess it up. So for them to even kind of take a risk of like not getting enough sleep shows that like from what everybody said, they were really exciting. The other thing I'll say is you mentioned like, yeah, I noticed that people kept calling them boys and their family do, and it's kind of I just once again I see this with my wife's family with the relative in question. There is kind of a tendency, maybe out of like protectiveness, to sort of almost infantilize um, mentally handicapped people sometimes because I think also it's sometimes just out of like kind of precautions to other people because I've seen some bad situations happen where I mean both personally but also just on social media and stuff where somebody people will perceive somebody in a different light, right? So something that somebody do would something that a child would do is a different context, right, than an adult. So my wife thought it was actually interesting that these five adults were actually able to kind of go out and independently do
Yeah.
what they were due to like as a group. I mean, I guess maybe Matthias was kind of like the chaperone in a way, but like Madruga is also like he's the driver, right? So he, it's I mean, it makes you wonder if they would have had the same level of freedom today as a group to operate a vehicle as they did back then. Food for thought.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. So starting off with Joe Shones. Joe Shones was a man who was just driving up a road in the mountains, uh, a little bit north of Yuba City, as you can see from the map. And he was planning on going on some sort of a trip with his family in the following days. And he was scoping out the area, checking out how the snow was laying and whether or not it's going to be a good time to ski or whatever he was planning to do with his family. But his car got stuck in in this particular area. Now, one thing to mention off the bat is that since this case happened in 78, we don't really have the official coordinates, or at least I haven't been able to pinpoint the official coordinates of where everything took place, but we do have some pretty credible not blog posts, but like forums, and I think I pinpointed the locations fairly accurately where the things happened, and I think it's gonna be good for us because we will be able to discuss like the distances and really make maybe more well-informed guesses to what may have happened to the five men. So let's begin with Joe Shones getting stuck, because he was the one guy who I think is the most credible non official sighting, because I don't think this was verified, but I believe he is the most credible one. Because, and just in general, okay, yeah, I'll jump to the how it doesn't make any sense for him to sight the man in this particular area where his car got stuck, because it's literally not in the same direction to Yuba City from Chico. Like Chico, you would have to go drive south to get to Yuba City, but he got stuck sort of in the northern direction a little bit, northwestern direction. So his car got stuck, and he got out of his vehicle, and this was like the evening. This was almost like the night, or it was perhaps the night. His car is stuck. He gets out of his vehicle, and he tries to push it out of like the snow ditch or something like that, and he starts suffering a heart attack, a mild heart attack that was later on proven to be, in factuality, what had happened to him, because he was checked out. So Joe Shones is having a heart attack in the middle of nowhere with no way to contact anyone for help, because it was like a really like small little rural road in the mountains, and it was night, and it was cold, and it was snowing. So he goes back inside of his vehicle, and he turns on the heating, and he is just laying back trying to relax. Obviously he is suffering severe pain, and he was delirious. That is his own quote, that he said that he was definitely delirious. So we have to take into account what he saw may not be completely accurate, and it will play a part. Now he's stuck there, and he's thinking to himself at one point, I'm not gonna make it back home. This is where it all ends for me. But he hears a vehicle park, and I think I have somewhere I've mapped. It was like fairly close, like just 100 or so meters behind him. A car parks, and people get out of that car, and they start talking. And then he thinks that, oh, this is my lucky day, I'm gonna get out. So he screams for help. And this is where I will want your input, dude, because the people that got out of the car, they go completely silent. And to me that was super creepy, but apparently he then later on, after a while, sees flashlights, and he screams again for help, and then those flashlights go off. So this is literally like something out of a horror film. Just imagine that scene, everyone. And dude, what is your take on that whole situation?
I mean, it's funny that maybe it's because because my age is now not that far off of his. So part of me really felt for this guy, like because yeah, he gets stuck in snow, he tries to push himself out of the snow, and then he feels feels like he might be dying, right? And then he's having like a really painful health event, and like he had a long night. I mean, we didn't even get to the part where he had to hike like 8 miles for help, but so part of me just is really sad and scared for him. The other part of it though, uh, maybe I'll save some of this reaction for later. Right now, yeah, it's super mysterious that people wouldn't help him unless like they didn't really understand that he was screaming in pain and for help. Like if they didn't really hear him, maybe they're like, dude, what's that guy doing in his car? Like howling and you know what I mean,
Mm,
if they couldn't hear him well. So that would be my take, because I get a lot of weird people parking by my house, and like if I heard them making noise, I'd be like, oh, there they go again in their car doing whatever. So like that's what makes
yes,
me kind of wonder, like I
I
do
see
wonder,
you.
because especially you know what I mean? Especially for what happens later in the case when some discoveries are made, when like another group of people are going down this road, where it's like, how busy is this little road here? Even though it's some weird, I think we should mention, I think now it's like paved or something in the maps, but back then it was like practically a fire road or something, right? It was some kind of like
Yeah,
dirt road kind of thing. Like it wasn't all nice and easy to get to. It was like the kind of road you really wouldn't want to take, like something that wasn't a pickup truck up necessarily, right?
exactly.
Especially in snow.
And one other thing about the sighting that is gonna be very creepy when we talk about what may have happened is the fact that he also heard a scream of a little child, and he did visually see the people. So it wasn't like it was super far away to that point, because let's remember it's the night, and if he visually saw people, maybe they were illuminated at first by a vehicle light or something like that, but still you would have to be pretty close. And I think distinguishing a distressful scream probably could be done, especially since there was a woman with them. And now the sighting is a little bit choppy, at least from what I've gathered. Some people say that he saw a woman holding a crying baby, and others stated that he saw a woman and he heard a baby cry, but he didn't in particular see the woman hold the baby. But apparently he saw five men and one woman with a crying baby. So I think a lot of people already know where this is going, because the Yuba County Five, they were five people. And later on we found out that this sighting was perhaps very likely of the five men who went missing, the Yuba County Five, because as he was walking towards help, he actually went to like some sort of another cabin in the woods where the owner of that cabin drove him to safety. As he was walking there, he actually walked past that vehicle. They drove past that vehicle that was left by the group, the one that parked behind Joe Shones's vehicle. And it was, in fact, the same vehicle. It was the Mercury Montego, owned by, let's remember, Jack Madruga, who was 30. He was the owner of that vehicle. And let's remember that he was super proud of it, and he would not let anyone else drive it. So I know how this woman comes into play. Another thing I want to immediately mention about Joe Madruga's Mercury is the fact that it had no bumps or scratches on it, and it was described back in the day, the road itself, to be very treacherous. And for you to avoid any sort of dents or like scratches on your vehicle, you would know exactly what you are doing on that road, knowing every single bump, knowing how to like pass certain areas. And then later on, the family members of the Yuba County Five, they all stated that none of the men had been there. Well, one of the guys, I assume, was there with his father when he was a kid on a fishing trip somewhere in this general vicinity, but I don't think he knew how to traverse. And he was definitely not a driver, so I don't know. So basically, what we can gauge that it looked like the men were driving in a very, like, in a manner of them knowing how to drive and things like that, but none of them had previously been here or knew of the road. So what do you make of that, man? Before we go any further, just a quick question.
Yeah, that was the most mysterious part, is that there were only two people that could drive, and the person that owned the vehicle, Madruga, he was not at all down with like doing weird, crazy stuff with it. He was like obsessively protective of it and super proud of it. It was literally his finest possession, and um, yeah, I don't see him trying to like four by four it up a hill.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In the snow.
Exactly. So several days after their initial disappearance, because the parents they waited throughout the night for the men to get back home, because it was super out of the ordinary for them not to do so. They notified the police, and the search began. But for a long time, no one was able to locate them because, let's just go back to maybe the Google Earth map really quickly. As you can see, this is Chico. This is the city where they watched the US Davis basketball team play. And this is Yuba City. So they would supposed to just take a really straightforward route down south home. It's approximately like 50 miles, but their vehicle was found 70 miles in the Plumas National Forest on a dirt road. So, that was definitely very interesting. So, I have a little bit of details about the vehicle I want to quickly read for the audience. Maybe this will generate some ideas for them. So, the Mercury Montego was stuck, but it wasn't anything five healthy young men couldn't have pushed out. The keys were gone, and there was evidence of the boys having stopped at a convenience store for snacks, I think referring to the Chico stop that they still made at 10 p.m., because I think those were the same snacks that they bought from there. Tickets from the UC Davis game were also there, so it was clear they had at least made it to the game to cheer on the team. Police also found inside of the Mercury Montego a neatly folded up map of California. So perhaps they weren't lost because the map was neatly folded. Your input, dude, before I jump to the what happened next?
Yeah, I mean, and then yeah, so to your point, it's pretty odd. And then like that California map, like just from having pre GPS use something like that, it's gonna have like major and maybe some minor highways on it. I don't even know that this road that they're on would have even been on that thing because it's such a like. I mean, what is it like? Does it even show up on this map here on Google Maps as a numbered thing? So that there's that. The other thing is the way it was left. Right? Is it worth mentioning that the
Exactly.
car was left with the window open, which like is super odd, right? Because that guy who's taking care of it, you would never, right? Even I mean, I won't even leave my window open, parked like on a sunny day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I don't like to get dust and crap in it, and I feel like this dude would be the same way. So when it's like all snowy and stuff outside, this dude's gonna leave his car like that.
Yeah, it's not good, man. It's not good. Now, some time passes actually, and month, in fact, until the snow clears. Because let's remember, the initially went missing on February 24th, which is, you know, February is pretty cold, I would say. Wouldn't you agree? In these mountains. I mean, because one
Yeah,
other thing I
yeah.
want you to react to, the boys were only wearing light jackets and they were driving into the mountainside. The car had open windows and had no dents or scratch marks. To do that, you would have to be someone who is careless about your vehicle, and you would have to know the dirt road like by heart almost to make that kind of an achievement of not denting your car. Joe wasn't that type of guy who could do that. So what do you think about that, man? Who was driving? Yeah, sorry.
I mean, yeah, no, exactly. Who was driving? Because, yeah, to your point, that they said that the car not only wasn't dented or anything, like nothing. Not the undercarriage wasn't scratched. They said it looked like the tires had been spinning a little bit, but it wasn't like stuck. It wasn't like in a way, and it wasn't in any situation that a couple of good sized men like were in the car couldn't just go ahead and push on it. Not only that, the car still had a quarter tank of gas. When they had to hot wire it to get it out of there because they didn't have the keys, it started literally on the first like turn
Yeah,
of the what I mean? Like it didn't even hiccup. That thing started right up, and it was just fascinating because yeah, to your point, like it was at that point, the road was in a state that if you didn't know what you were doing, if you literally didn't know the road, or like knew exactly, oh, there's a dip here, there's a bend there, like, oh, I better watch it here, like you probably almost certainly you would damage it. So that was really odd, and like I said, this was not the kind of driving Madruga did. It's also mentioning about the jackets this was something that it took me a couple shows to pick up. So not only not one but two of these guys, both Weir and Matthias, they both separately told. I guess they both of them had grandmothers living with them, or they were
Hmm.
living in a house that had their grandmother in it. They had both separately told their grandmothers in their respective houses before they left. When the grandma was like, "Oh, take a jacket," they're like, "Oh, I don't need a jacket. We're not going to do anything that's going to require,
Whoa.
like they're just right." So that's crazy. So like for sure, as far as anybody knew, even apparently at least one of them, this was not on the menu.
Exactly. Now, June 4th comes, and at this point, the snow has melted, and some motorcyclists, multiple of them, went to a trailer maintained by the Forest Service at the campsite of the road. So let's jump back to the Google Earth really quickly. So this is Rogers Cow Camp. This is apparently the general area where, Madruga's car was found. And this is the campsite that, the trailer back in the day was at. So it was, if we would measure it just as the crows fly, it would say 5.6 miles, but apparently you definitely can't walk straight. And now, if you would take the closest route, I believe, well, there are multiple routes, and I believe they didn't even take the fastest route to get to this place, and not all of them even got to it. We'll soon talk about that. They actually took the route, apparently, because of the area where the other bodies were found. We could probably estimate that they took the route that took them 19.4 miles to get to that trailer. I'm talking about the boys, not the motorcyclist. I mean, the men, not the motorcyclist. Now, the men arrive at the area of this trailer and they smell a stench of rotting human flesh. Apparently, they knew how it smelled, or at least they figure out what it was all about, and they called police immediately. Now, police arrives and they find that the trailer had a broken window. Now, they enter the trailer and they find the body of Ted, this he was the oldest member, Ted Weiher, who was 32, covered in 8 like pairs of bed sheets, something like that. And he had lost half of his body weight from his length of his beard because he wasn't shaving his beard. The crazy part is they estimated that he had survived for like literally month, I believe, right? Like 9 weeks of beard growth was on him. So he was living there throughout the winter times. How crazy is that?
And I was trying to think, like, how long would it take to lose 100 pounds? I feel like it would take about a month or 2 months, right? Of not eating to lose 100 pounds if you weighed about 200 pounds.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, but then, I mean, clearly he's getting water though, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, you can't go more than a couple days
Right.
without water. So that's interesting that there's like some level of
Mm,
sustenance, but
exactly.
not. But then let's get to. I guess that's the other part though, because there was right.
Oh
There was
yeah.
food in the cabin.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So just a quick information about how they found Ted's body. Maybe the audience members will get some ideas as well. Now his decaying body was found laying on a bed wrapped in 8 sheets in a trailer. Now the trailer, as I've said, was 19.4 miles away from where the Mercury Montego was found. Ted died under the most mysterious circumstances out of all of the men, and let's remember that one of them has not even been located. That would be Gary Mathias. He was not even located. The others were all found pretty much in the same forest. We'll get to that pretty soon. Now, he had lost almost half his body weight, and his feet were badly frostbitten, close to the point of gangrenation. He was missing his shoes. Ted also apparently lived for as long as 3 months after the men were last seen, starving to death despite an ample supply of food and heating materials nearby. So this was strange because it seemed none of the trailer's life-saving amenities had been used. He was concluded to have died from a mixture of starvation and exposure, but both a heating system and food were readily available. There was also a whole shed full of canned food, but it appeared only a dozen had been opened and eaten. The fireplace looked to have never been lit despite the availability of matches and kindling. The trailer's heating system was also never turned on. So that's all I got to say. You want to add anything to that before we move forward? That's crazy.
Yeah, it was so crazy. Like there was like I remember seeing something where they had two tanks of propane outside. There were matches inside. Like you said, there was like kindling that they could easily start the fire. There was all of this canned goods. The interesting thing was apparently the kind of canned goods they were had required a tool that was there, but the tool was something that you normally
Mm,
would have been familiar with in the army. So it was like apparently, like well, actually, one of the YouTubers was saying, "Hey, listen, I was in the army. He was in the army, not me. He was in the army, and he was saying the first thing they teach you is how to like stay alive and how to use, like these like kind of these tools, these things for like, here's how you feed yourself in the field." But so that was interesting that like for anybody to even there were only two people in that group that really would have been familiar with that tool normally. It was something that was, for some reason, specific
yeah.
to, I don't know, that kind of wilderness survival stuff. And maybe not even like, I mean, I don't think I ran into stuff like that in Boy Scouts. So, yeah.
Very, very good point, man. And I will foreshadow the story a little bit here. Jack Madruga, the man who served in the military and who was the owner of the vehicle, his body was found on the route to the trailer alongside Bill Sterling's body, so they never made it to the trailer. So he couldn't have opened those cans for Ted, but Gary could, because Gary Mathias also knew how to use it, and Gary's tennis shoes were also in the trailer. This to me indicates that Gary was actually there, and I would feel very strong by stating that Gary was probably the one who was opening the canned food for Ted, because Ted, according to his family statements, was clueless sometimes and could not make rational decisions. I believe he was the one who was contemplating not leaving his house when his house was on fire. In particular, his bedroom ceiling was on fire, and his parents later said that he didn't want to get out of the burning house because he was scared of missing work the next day. He wanted to get like a good night's sleep or something. So he wasn't the one who could make rational decisions. So it would make sense for me that maybe if Gary was feeding him for a time, when Gary decides to leave the trailer to perhaps go to safety or get some help, Ted doesn't figure out that he actually needs to eat and just, you know, sleeps. But then again, he was wrapped in 8 layers of bed sheets. That indicates that someone else wrapped him in that. So maybe Gary wrapped him in that. We will talk about that. And also, let's remember that Jack Hewitt was also found nearby. His body was found nearby, so it's pretty likely that Jack Hewitt was also in the trailer. But let's move on in the notes a little bit. I have some more interesting details for the audience. So, as I was saying, a day after the search parties were sent out, because let's remember, they find Ted's body in this trailer. The next day, the search parties were sent out. And for everyone who's watching this on the YouTube, you could definitely glance really quickly, because let's remember that this particular line right here is the distance as the crows fly from Madruga's car to the trailer. Now, how are they gonna find the bodies of the other four men after they locate Ted? Well, they will be going back. The search parties will be trailing back on the trails, on the roads that could be taken from, the Madruga's car to the trailer. And in fact, they were successful because somewhere midway, 11 miles away from the car, they find Jack Madruga's and Bill Sterling's bodies. And the information here is that the bodies were found approximately 11 miles from the Mercury Montego on the road to the trailer, which probably means they were trying to get to it, which I definitely think the five men, and we will talk about the woman and the crying baby, which was a complete mystery to me. They were all probably trying to get to the trailer. Now, autopsies showed that they had both died of hypothermia. Deputies speculated that one may have succumbed to the desire for sleep, which is from what I've heard the last stage of hypothermia is when you fall asleep and you die. And the other refused to leave his side because apparently Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling, they were like almost best friends. So it makes sense. So that's how they died. Then 2 days later after that, Jack Hewitt's own father found his son's backbone 2 miles northeast of the trailer. So the trailer is here. So 2 miles northeast, that would be somewhere. Oh, that's actually quite. I don't know. Probably not here because, yeah, I don't think it was that far. I don't know. Somewhere around here, from what I've gathered, it was actually pretty close to the trailer. That's how we could indicate that Jack Hewitt was also present in the trailer. So yeah, before I jump to what happened next, you wanna, I guess, add anything to the finding of the bodies of Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, and Jack Hewitt?
It was interesting because their local, I think it was their local police chief or sheriff or whatever, I can't remember what kind of law enforcement it was, the local agency responsible for them that eventually widened the search to where they found them. He had actually gone to high school with Ted Weiher.
Whoa.
So he actually knew him. And I guess he felt kind of responsible, like, oh, I need to find that guy. So it's kind of fascinating that, like all these people that had, it turns out significant amounts of cognitive impairment, like once again, it doesn't seem like they knew how to diagnose people very well. But like Ted Weiher, the same guy that, like you said, they had to like drag out of bed to keep from burning to death, and whose parents eventually got him to quit his snack bar job, which I'm not scoffing at it, but a snack bar job doesn't seem that complicated, but they felt like it was stressing him out too much, like he couldn't handle the responsibility. Now I don't know once again how much maybe that's real, like they were dealing with some sort of, like outburst in the home, or whether it was that they were coddling him or being a little bit overprotective because, we know now there's like people with Down syndrome that work at McDonald's and they work proudly, and they enjoy actually the social contact and feeling useful. So it's interesting to like there's some stuff we don't really know about the conditions of these people and the extra stresses that maybe people were just embarrassed to talk about. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like how like people with severe autism have meltdowns, where sometimes that's what, despite some of them having the actual like mental horsepower, there's other behavioral stuff that gets in the way of them being able to function.
Yeah.
It's interesting we don't know that, but whatever reason, yeah. So they expanded the search. Actually, this was the reason why the local law enforcement actually took it a lot more seriously, because there was a personal angle. He like got on it and then got like other state officials involved, and then they find the car. Um, I think that it is worth calling out that in terms of like who could have been caring for who in the house, Jack Hewitt, the youngest one,
Yeah.
the one that they found like really close to the trailer, he was the one with the most severe intellectual disability. So I've heard a number quoted of his IQ of being like around 46, which is, you know, extremely low. He was also said to be a really nice person, but he was, pretty shy, probably kind of
Mm,
intimidated by the world around him. You know what I mean?
yes.
To the point where he didn't. This will come become important in a second. He didn't like using the telephone. I
Oh
mean, I don't
yeah.
like using the telephone either, but it,
Yeah.
but so I, maybe that's more than just that. But yeah, anyways, it was interesting that you know, I guess it goes to show the spectrum of where a lot of it's just kind of fascinating, right? That like these guys were all still like pretty good friends and able to find an activity together that they could do in this basically the Special Olympics kind of basketball team that they were on. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, once again, just not prepared for the kind of super rigorous like Sierra's, snowpack level of danger that they ended up in.
Exactly. Very, very well said, man. Very, very good insights. I actually didn't know some of the things that you've said, so it's really good that you put that in because I think that will serve a purpose when we're actually trying to find out on the theories section of the podcast. Now, moving forward, there's one person who I haven't mentioned yet. That's Gary Mathias, who was 25. Now, where is he? So the information I have on him on my notes is that despite finding evidence, and the evidence being the tennis shoes and him being the only one who could have possibly been there and opened the cans for Ted and for himself, I presume, because he probably ate as well. So finding evidence that he was in the trailer with Ted at some point, they never found Gary. Investigators found Matthias's shoes in the nearby woods, suggesting he had also survived for some time beyond the last night they were seen alive. Now, in an area to the northwest of the trailer, roughly a quarter mile, which is apparently 400 meters from it, searchers found three Forest Service blankets and a rusted flashlight by the road. So maybe this is, I mean, we literally have only this in regards to these particular items. We don't have anyone linked to them. So maybe it was Gary Matthias who was actually, carrying them for some reason out of the trailer. I mean, I don't know, maybe the audience members have some ideas. I would love to hear them in the comments section. Um, Another notable report was made about the whole, just in general, the men. Now, before I jump into that next, I guess, sighting that was apparently credible by the police investigation, but before recording the episode, we sort of had a little discussion about that particular witness sighting, and we don't find it that credible. I want to jump into it. So just to finish off, that's literally all we have on the bodies and how they were found. There are like key questions here, a lot of questions. We will return to those questions, but I just want to go alongside the notes I have, and I want to jump to a particular notable report from a woman who worked at a store in Brownsville. Brownsville is a little town, like a super small town, 30 miles from the area where, Madurga's car had been abandoned. And the boys, the men, they could have reached Brownsville if they had continued down the road from where they left the car. So if they just continued, they could have left Brownsville. I don't really understand how they could have done that, because this is where they left the car and Brownsville is literally here. So I don't know how that works. Maybe I have the wrong Brownsville, but to my understanding, there's literally just one Brownsville in California, and it's this particular Brownsville. And the crazy part is, I'm just gonna go through the notes here. On March 3rd, so this is, oh yeah, so on March 3rd, So this is not the timestamp in the disappearance or anything like that. This is just when the woman who worked at that particular grocery store made the report. So she saw flyers with the men's pictures and information about the $1,215 reward. So that's back in the day money. So if we would, you know, uh, see how much that is worth today, that's around $5,000. So the family makes a reward and they put up flyers. Now, this woman from the grocery store, she sees the flyers and she then contacts deputies that four of them, so not five, four, this is going to be important, had stopped at the store in a red pickup truck 2 days after the disappearance. The store owner corroborated her account. The woman said she identified the men immediately as from out of the area due to their, quote, big eyes and facial expressions. Two of the men, whom she identified as Jack Hewitt and Bill Sterling, were in the phone booth. And let's remember, Jack Hewitt hates using phones, so that doesn't really make any sense. While the other two went inside, police said she was a credible witness and they took her account seriously. Additional detail came from the store owner. He told investigators that men whom he believed to be Ted Weiher and Jack Hewitt came in and bought burritos, chocolate milk, and soft drinks. Ted's brother said that while driving to Brownsville in a different car in apparent ignorance of the basketball game seemed completely out of the ordinary for any of the men, so he doesn't really believe that that had happened. Now, the owner's description of the two men' behavior seemed consistent with them, as Ted Weiher would, quote, eat anything he could get his hands on, and was often accompanied by Jack Hewitt more than any other of the other four. However, Hewitt's brother said that Jack hated using telephones to the point that he would handle calls for his brother Jack from the other men in the group. So, why I said it's important to note that four, so one of them was not there, so it would only have to be four of them. And yeah, I don't know. Your thoughts on the sighting? Do you find it credible?
No, I really don't. I mean, I mean, some of it, because I don't mean to make this comical, but like, what, late at night, people showing up at convenience stores, like with the munchies and with big eyes and acting weird. I mean, that's like every night at a convenience store, right? People just showing up, drunk or high and looking for munchies and grabbing burritos and stuff like that. And, big eyes, huh? Well, maybe stoned eyes. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the other thing was this only came out after there was back then it was $1,000, which is equivalent to about $4,000 reward was offered. And I can't help, like, I'm not saying they lied. I'm saying maybe they talked themselves into it. The store owner and the worker,
Oh,
that they're like, oh yeah, it could be this. I mean, because it's like playing the lottery. Maybe, who knows, if it does turn out to be something important, then maybe you end up with a good chunk of change back
yeah.
then. But yeah, I don't. It doesn't make sense. The car's wrong. The By the way, like okay, so how are they riding this weird car and so casual about getting snacks and food and not going for help, not looking worried? You know what I mean?
And then
I just
going back, and then going all the
Yeah.
way back into the mountains to die.
Right, right, with because they got their burritos and chocolate milk and yeah, people making phone, like, who the F are they calling? Who are they calling at that time of night? Like, by the way, how come they couldn't pull the phone records on that telephone? So I don't
Yeah,
I sometimes I wonder if they were just trying to be nice when they said it was a credible witness, like they didn't want to like have anybody like say, "Well, I'm not going to say anything because they're going to call me a dumbass that I didn't help." You know what I mean? So maybe
yeah,
they were just trying to like, yeah, that's kind of my 2 cents on
exactly.
that.
Now it's a perfect time to get to the questions section of the podcast. We actually did a structured, like a structured script for this podcast, so it's good because we could just follow along. So, a lot of questions I think the audience members have already, and as well as myself and yourself, I would assume, Glenn. So I think we could go through the questions. So the first question I see in the notes is, what had led them to the snowy mountains? Because they were supposed to drive straight back down south to Yuba City, but they went to the mountains. So I think one of the answers, because I will hand it over to you in a second, there's a theory connected to this potential answer is that the same Gary Mathias, now he was the most forceful one of the group, and this has been mentioned by the family members that he was the most insistent and he could pretty much control what the group was doing to some extent, or at least more so than anyone else. And now he had friends in Forbestown. So this is why I mentioned why I put Forbestown for people wondering on the YouTube channel who are watching this right now. Forbestown is a little town that you would have if you're gonna go there, you would have to pass Orwell, which is a bigger town, and you would have to basically go through this particular intersection. I want to quickly put like us in the Google Street View position for 1 second. This right here. Now, if you turn here, you're gonna get to Forbestown in a jiffy. But if you go there back in 78, you will run out of paved road and enter a dirt road, like, in a handful of miles. So there is a theory that they were supposed to go to Forbestown to see Gary's friends, and I don't know, maybe they could have questioned the Gary's friends. I don't have that information where the friends questioned or not, but maybe they didn't, and it was night, and maybe they didn't take this turn, and they drove into the mountains. So that's one of the potential answers. Um, what do you think about it, man? What could have led them to the mountains?
Yeah, I mean, if I were to look at the likely answers, I would just the short version is because I have some stuff about Gary Mathias that I'm saving for a little bit later, but yeah, I would say that's probably the best guess is that he had something to do with it. To your point, he was the strongest personality, though interestingly, he was the newest member of the group. So the other guys knew each other for about 4 years. He had known them for about one. There's a lot about Gary Mathias that is sort of like hidden from like the first layer of like the story you get from Wikipedia and from other people's podcasts. And apparently Sacramento Bee has like a 2 article thing that digs in deep about him, but it's behind a paywall. Thanks, Sacramento Bee. But luckily we have Reddit, and Reddit people were able to get to the article and kind of synthesize some of it. But there's a lot more to Gary Mathias. Some of the stuff is amazing, and then some of it's almost seems like legend. Like you don't really know how much
Whoa.
of it's true or not. But the guy, good and bad, had a lot. I mean, there's a lot of bad, but there's a lot to it, and I think that's the part where, yeah,
Mm.
yeah, I think there's like a lot of silence about him about from like you said like did they ever talk to those people in what was the town again? Porter's
For Forbestown.
what was Forbes Sound. Sorry. Yeah. I mean, yeah, where it's like, I feel like there's a lot of people that know him that seem to be keeping their mouths shut about his behavior. But I think, yeah, to your point, that is the only thing I can think of that could have got them off of what should have been a very simple back and forth trip
Okay.
to
Oh,
the game and back.
I
So,
I
yeah.
can't I can't wait for that. But before we jump to that, we still have a little bit of questions. The other question is, why, if Joe Shones did see the men, why did the men hid from Joe Shones? Now, to answer that question, I would say if because I believe these were the men that Joe Shones saw, and I don't know why they hid. There's no way of saying that, because let's remember they park behind him, they hear screams, and they're silent. Then a little while, they probably start using flashlights. They hear the same screams again, and they turn off their flashlights. To me, this indicates they're not lost. They're not trying to get help. The only thing I can gauge for a certainty, this behavior indicates they're not lost. You know, what is your like? Why would they hide from Joe Shones? Like, what they were doing something devious in the mountains?
I I'm gonna take a controversial stance here and say that because of the medical event that Joe Shones was going through, and because it was nighttime, and because he himself said that he was in so much pain that he couldn't even really his own perception. He questions his own perceptions. I I'll go on record here saying that I don't know that I necessarily count his. I don't. I'm not even sure it's the same people.
Okay,
Like as much it would say that like, oh, it seems like a coincidence, but we don't know that they were the only people on that road. If it was them, I don't know that what he perceived is accurate, especially the
excellent.
woman with the baby, and especially because there's other. The woman. I'll really quick, 30 seconds. I'll say that I remember specifically being on a scout trip. We were all in the car at night. The long story is we were in Death Valley. Freaking wind blew all the troops' tents. So we were sleeping. There were five of us sleeping in our minivan, and we were seeing stuff outside in the dark, and it was lit. And we were seeing things. We were like experienced scouts with good night vision, like like teenager night vision. Lots of experience, like literally probably I don't know, 20, 25, 30 years with of camping collectively under our belts, and we perceive things, and in the morning we're like, oh, that isn't at all what we thought was going on last night in
Whoa.
the light of day.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's just my 2 cents. That's why, I mean, I'm sure we'll get a lot of debate about that in the comments, but I feel like that's like one dude's statement really seems to push a lot of weight in this case, and I get why, because yeah, they found the car right around the place they said it was at. So why would you not trust him? But I don't, for whatever reason.
Okay. Okay. I
Eh.
guess, dude, that's excellent. That's excellent. And you actually answered the following question. And the following question was, who was the woman and the baby that Joe Shones witnessed? So since you gave your answer already to me, basically the answer would be, because let's say, I'm still going, I'm not saying that I believe in this, but let's say if I had to answer, uh, I think the answer would be, I do sort of lean towards that Joe Shones did see the men, but I would say if I had to bet on it, I would probably bet that he was delirious when he heard the crying baby and the woman, because I believe either if the crying baby and the woman was actually there, like if he actually saw that, then that would probably mean that they were not. This was some sort of a crazy situation, like some crazy mountain stuff, like from the 80s, from like the late 70s, like crazy mountain situations. Don't even want to get into it. What I have at the back of my head right there, but I don't think that that would mean that if that woman was actually there, that she was actually with the same Yuba Five. This was a completely different group doing some creepy stuff, like in the mountains. But yeah, and I would say if he saw the man, then I think he was delirious, and the woman and the baby was not actually there. So that's how I would answer the question. Now the other question we have is, where is Gary Mathias? Because his presence is pretty strong at the trailer, but his body has never been found. I think if I had to bet, I would say he's probably dead. He probably died somewhere in the mountains. The mountains are vast. Let's remember uh, some other cases that we've done where people go missing at the mountains and forests. They're never located. I think it's a good chance that he may have died, but his remains have not been located. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a good possibility. I'll also say though, based on some other stuff that happened in his past, where he literally walked. He like so this happened before. There's a lot of stuff that happened with this guy, but one of the times he ran off. Basically, he kind of like left home by force and went to his grandmother's house, like up in Oregon or something, and wherever it was someplace like not close. And he literally walked. He turned up again months late, like a month later or something. He had walked 500 miles. He had like done like he had done like the Rambo version of like the what's the hitchhiker guy? What's his name? The hiker
Um,
guy that
yeah.
we covered. Anyway, yeah.
I
So
mostly harmless. I'm sorry.
mostly harmless. He had done like a version of that, but like with no backpack, nothing. He shows up all disheveled and like dirty and like, hair uncombed back at his parents' house. And he literally walked by foot like 500 miles. And then another time, by the way, this isn't even everything about this dude. This isn't even getting into the violence and stuff that's happened in his life. Another time he escaped from a psychiatric facility through a sewer pipe like it was Shawshank Redemption or something. Sorry, spoiler for everybody who hasn't seen that, but like it's been 20 years.
This guy
Um,
is insane. What the
yeah,
hell?
and then he hitchhiked in like his freaking like like the hospital clothes they put on you.
Yes.
Like he hitchhiked all the way back in those clothes. So like, yeah, this guy's like, I could see
Whoa.
how he might think he could get away with it now. But to your point, though, did he actually survive it? Yeah, that's another question because, by the way, the thing with the shoes. So
Yeah.
they think that maybe he took Weir's shoes.
Yep.
Now the question is how. I heard something. Like I said, once again, it sucks when you can't get all the. We did a lot of research on this, but it's always like someone else manages to find these little nuggets that we try to aggregate, right? So I thought somebody said that somehow Weir had better shoes, but I'm like, well, like hard like boots or something. But I'm like, well, why were his friggin' feet, gangrenous from frostbite and not Matthias? We don't know that that didn't happen to Matthias, but we at least we have Weir's body to look at, and I'm like, well, it didn't do well by he didn't do well by his own shoes, but this other guy did later. Who knows? Maybe one person was able to take better care of their feet somehow.
Yeah.
Because I always figured, like, for that scenario, clearly that happened on the hike over, right? You're hiking for 20 miles in the snow. 20 miles is a ridiculous amount to hike in one day, let alone through the snow up into the mountains. Um, you can be done, obviously, but yeah, like that would be just the recipe for frostbite. I Yeah, I
Hmm.
don't get. I know I'm going a little long on this point. I know, but yeah, it's pretty odd to me. Like,
It's
yeah,
what I was gonna say is excellent because you actually foreshadowed a lot of stuff and we can connect it. Now, one last thing I wanna mention because I think someone in the comments would have mentioned this before we actually jump to the probably the theories is the fact that you know there were a lot of things found in the trailer and all of those things seem to belong either to the trailer maintenance people or to Ted or to uh you know Gary Mathias, but there was this gold pocket watch without its crystal end and it was laying in the table and it didn't seem to belong to anyone. Neither it was obviously not left by the trailer people, like the people who maintained the trailer, because it was not a private trailer. I believe it was some sort of a state-owned, like like forest trooper trailer, something like that. And the watch didn't belong to anyone. But now, as you've said, all of these weird things about Gary Mathias, I wouldn't put it past that golden watch somehow belonging to Gary Mathias because it didn't belong to Ted or anyone else from the group. So there's this super mysterious golden pocket watch on the table. What do you make of that?
yeah. I always feel like the gold watch thing. It's interesting, but I also wonder if it's a red herring. where it's one of those things that people get so focused on, and then like they read in, just like the woman with the baby thing, where it's like one thing, but then like to your point, well, I mean, why leave it, right? Why leave it behind? Now I have a reason when we get to kind of the next thing, but yeah, if it is Gary's, well, I know why maybe he left it, but yeah, otherwise, yeah, it's a little weird, but it just could be like one of, like you said, one of those aggregations of things where like, the people that use that trailer, maybe one of the rangers forgot it, and they're like, oh, just the next time I'm up there, I'll pick it up, or you know, some random person coming through there.
Yeah, we have a few more questions. Why did they drive out of the way, and why they left the vehicle? To be honest, I really can't say. Maybe they got, because let's remember that the car was stuck, but they could have pushed it out. So why not just push it out? Why leave? And why, in particular, leave the open windows? And that's literally the last question I have. You got any input? I have no idea.
The one thing I wonder is when they were kind of the way they were assuming everything that's going on, if getting to the probably the theories part, if Matthias is having some kind of schizophrenic episode, violent episode, especially if he's been doing the not taking his meds. Um, I wonder if the crying baby could have been someone like what's his name, Hewitt? Is that his name?
Oh,
Um, you know what I mean? Once again, people kind of forget that sometimes people with mental disabilities can in fact act like children and express emotion in ways that, like, when you're a man, you're like, oh, act like a man. Well, like a little child, someone who thinks they're a little child or acts like a little child might cry like a little child. So I could see, like, especially if there was some kind of violent or coercive situation going down where he's kind of like freaking out and having a major paranoid schizophrenic episode and kind of you know, slapping everybody around. And then he's like, someone's in that car. Someone's like, shh, shh. And that's why they're all, you know what I mean? That's where I could think, and maybe that's where they're like, oh, they're after us, they're after us. We got to get into the woods, and maybe that's where he kind of like got them out, going into that weird path. Otherwise, it makes
that's,
no sense
yeah.
to me. That is the number one mystery. That is the number one. Everything else I can kind of like cobble together a story, but aside from one theory that I'll kind of dispel in a second, as far as how much I believe it. Yeah, it makes zero sense to me why the hell they would leave that car.
That's excellent, man. Like
Yeah.
the one that you said, I never even thought about that. Like this is why it's so good for me to ask for your input all the time, because you have these really good theories. Like I didn't even think about it. What if
Oh
Gary?
man, teamwork, teamwork. That's what it is. You and me bouncing stuff off each
Yeah,
other. That's what I love about this show.
excellent, man, excellent. Because for real, maybe Gary was in control of the situation, and when he heard the man screaming, maybe if he's schizophrenic, he's interpreting that scream as a violent scream against them potentially, and against what he was doing, because maybe he was a mastermind of some crazy hiking trip into the mountains in the middle of the night. And he's like, shh, let's go, something like that. You know what I mean? That's,
Yeah, yeah,
dude,
exactly.
I would not. Yo, that's an insane point that you just made, and it might actually break the case. I mean, guys in the comments, please react to this theory. I really wanna, I really wanna know what you think. Yeah,
Don't worry, they will.
excellent.
I expect to take a beating. Yeah.
Nah, it's all good, man. Okay, so I think we could move to the theories, since it's probably we are on the one of the final legs of the show this week. So the first, we have a handful of theories. The first theory, and I think since we have been talking about it a lot, I just have it named as Gary Mathias went crazy. So you have some points. I have some points in regards to this. My points are pretty simple. Just a backstory on Gary. Gary was stationed in West Germany in the early 70s and developed drug problems. Those eventually led him to being diagnosed with schizophrenia and being psychiatrically discharged. He was nearly arrested for assault twice and often suffered psychotic episodes, Gary Mathias was being treated on an outpatient basis with stelazine and cognitin. So these are two drugs apparently that fight schizophrenia. And he was considered by his physicians to be, quote, one of our sterling success cases. So, the only thing I have on him is that, yeah, he, you know, had schizophrenia, and he apparently was doing really well. But he was as well off his meds for a while now. I think he was off his meds for a long time, but still he was off them. So that's the only thing I have. You have some more points in regards to Gary going crazy.
Yeah, I'll being mindful of time, I'll cobble them together and go over what happened with him in the past, and then project them into my future theory about him. And this is probably my number one theory about what happened. With the statement that I do have some holes in it. Okay, so yeah, to your point, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia in the army, specifically paranoid schizophrenia, which is the type of schizophrenia where you have thoughts, you're literally paranoid, about like potential like threats against you, that maybe things are conspiring against you. It's kind of like the kind of schizophrenia that people make fun of, with like the tinfoil hat and the TV's listening to me. Though I was joking with my daughter today. Today the TV really is listening to you, right? So maybe there was like, maybe schizophrenics were like time travelers, right? They just they were telling all of us what was going to happen when your TV really does listen to you.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, yeah. So that's probably an off-color joke, but yeah, I mean, no, I mean, in seriousness, no, it's very disruptive to the person's life because there's three different phases. The first phase is when it starts coming on. Person starts disconnecting from reality, starts like usually the grades suffer if they're in school, and it also, like to your point about drugs in high school and then later in the military, it's also not uncommon for somebody suffering from this, because they're in genuine pain, right? I mean, they're in actual pain. Their life is starting to fall apart, to self medicate and to self medicate with, illegal drugs or alcohol. Um, I will say that back then, the prescription drugs they had for schizophrenia, and even now, they're better now, but they're not. I mean, there's still a major issue with the drugs having side effects that are undesirable, where it makes the person feel bad. So there's like famous episodes, like if anyone's ever seen Soldier Girl, that video of the young lady that loses her mind on the Atlanta train, and it became a really famous case. She, case in point, was a paranoid schizophrenic, I think, and had other issues and was offered medication. So as you might imagine, something that disrupts your life might also make it hard for you to stay good about taking your medication, even without side effects. And with side effects, some of those side effects can make you feel bad. So, like, just imagine you think everyone's conspiring against you, and then they're trying to make you take a medicine that makes you feel awful. Well, okay, that's it's a challenge. So they have some big challenges in their lives. This guy specifically, like you said, had not only had he been almost arrested a few times, he had actually been arrested. He had even punched a prison guard in the face, where he said, "Hey, come here, come here," and the guy came close and he punched him in the face. Or
Whoa. So he's aggro.
he's aggro. He's aggro. He has had some major aggression issues in the past. There was another on the Reddit thread that I looked at that quoted about the Sacramento Bee article. They said that he had like threatened some lady. He had some kind of delusion where he like threatened the lady, and then he threatened her 3-year-old and said, "I thought I had to kill you, and I think I will do it," to like her 3-year-old kid. So he's
What?
seeing. Yeah, I mean, but once again, like, this isn't. We're not. I'm not saying this like this person's a bad person. They're suffering from a disease, right? They're suffering from a mental ailment that is making them do and imagine and see things that are not real. So I think this person was much more dangerous than probably it's been spun. And to that effect, one of the things that people have commented on, even the families of the other unfortunate souls on this trip, is that his family really clammed up after this. They have been no help. They refused to be interviewed for Unsolved Mysteries back when Unsolved Mysteries covered. I'm assuming it was the 1990s. Unsolved Mysteries. They don't want to talk about it, and I'll say, okay, on the off chance that he did get away and he did make it out of there, I'm not saying they did this. Let me really couch, like be careful about what I'm saying.
Yes.
What I'm saying is there's plenty of other cases, even recently, of like there was a crazy enough a crazy a dude that like killed like a graduate student who was like a veteran, um,
Oh
and
crap.
that guy and that guy, by the way, like did not fit any kind of profile, or like the guy, this is like something, the guy wasn't a gang member or something, the guy just kind of, he was clearly crazy. He became obsessed with this guy. He killed him, and his family, they're pretty sure helped this guy get out of the country. So it's not like that doesn't happen, even for seriously mentally ill people, where their family knows they're mentally ill. So I do always kind of wonder, like, if he did get out of it, yeah, maybe, I mean, it would be kind of interesting to know how you would hide the other after effects of that. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the theory about that, is that
Yeah.
I do see that as the most likely theory, that they, oh, by the way, oh, let me just finish the thought. I'll finish the theory, then we'll move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they go, they take out he goes, he forces them off the path. It starts going wrong. He starts getting even more paranoid. This guy starts screaming in the car, which, like, God, of all freaking coincidences, right? Now he thinks that, like, oh no, they really are against me, and here they are, now this guy's watching me in the car. Like, who would think, right? You stop in the car, and like now this guy's screaming in the car, because he happens to be having a major medical emergency. So they go running off into the woods in this weird death hike. They get to the cabin. What's his name's Weir's feet are frozen, to crap. I mean, they're gone. He's got an injury, and what I think is this Matthias guy, and now he's not on his medication anymore, for sure, right? For 8 weeks,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
He more and more starts slipping into like maybe some kind of fugue state. I think his empathy level starts going down more and more, and maybe his connection to reality, to the point where basically, like, maybe he was paranoid about leaving signs that he was doing something unreasonably, but he's not in a reasonable state of mind, right? So he's doing things that are not rational. They're only doing enough to, like, basically stay alive and not sustain themselves. And at some point, his empathy level, or maybe even just his connectedness with reality, goes to the point where he just leaves. We're there to die while he goes off. I mean, he didn't die of no
Mm-hmm.
water. He died of,
Yes.
they think, like hypothermia, right? So, um,
Could I
you
stop
know,
you here because there's
yeah,
one person in this particular theory that you're talking about. There's one particular person, and I almost forgot where we have to address Jack Hewitt, because if you're gonna look at the map real quick, man, you can see that Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling, they're found, halfway to the trailer, so they didn't make it. And now Jack Hewitt was found really close to the trailer, indicating that he maybe, like, we don't know if he was inside of it because there's nothing of his, like, ownership that was found inside of it, but he was found close to the trailer. So according to this particular theory that you are, referring to, I'm just trying to add this in because someone in the comments is gonna have that question. So I'm just gonna
yeah.
run right in front of it and ask you, in your particular scenario, which is definitely very well thought out. Like, I'm really impressed by, this concept. It's really amazing, and it's really, like, it makes a lot of sense. Where in your scenario is Jack Hewitt?
I think he is following the only person he trusts, who is Weir. So, the other two guys, I think Matthias is like, oh, they can't make it. Oh, sorry, we got to keep going. We can't stop. And I mean, I guess he's right. If you're going to go on a death hike, you can't stop in the middle of it, right? If he's got some kind of goal, some kind of imaginary goal of shelter, or some place that he thinks he's getting to, though it seems like maybe they settled on where they ended up. I feel like Hewitt is just there for the ride. I mean, like, I really struggle to make sure I don't say anything too insensitive, but an IQ that low, you're not like leading anything. You're kind of along for the ride. It's still, like for sure he had a great personality from what was described, but I don't know that he's doing a lot of rationalizing of anything. right?
Yeah.
This is somebody who really needs to be actively taken care of, and it sounds like Weir was doing that role of like, hey, I'm in charge, so when in doubt, follow me.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm in charge of you.
Yeah.
Hewitt, obviously not in charge of the situation. Matthias with his, like, oh, but by the way, Matthias, like you said, we mentioned, like, his friends he was going to visit. Case in point, he had a whole other social group outside of this of like, I guess, let's say people without intellectual disabilities.
Mm.
So, do you think he could kind of run laps around this group of
Yeah.
people if he really wanted to make them do what he wanted?
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. The answer is yeah. I definitely think he could. Okay, so that's like a strong theory. I think we may end up like, since we're not completely done just yet, I think we may end up jumping back to Gary in a second. Now, what are the chances? Because we have another theory here is that someone else is responsible for what happened. None of the five people is responsible. Let's be the devil's advocates for Gary here. What are the chances that there was an external force or influence? I think the only thing I have here on my end is that the Montego's undercarriage had no dents, gouges, or even mud scrapes, not even on its low hanging muffler, despite having been driven a long distance up a mountain road with many bumps and ruts. Either the driver had been very careful or it was someone familiar with the road. The familiarity Jack Madruga was not known to have, nor his family said would he have let someone else drive his car. The car also was unlocked and had the window rolled down when it was found, and they also said it was unlike him to leave the car so unsecured. So, this to me, at least to some extent, indicates that Jack was not driving the car, or if he was actively guided by someone how to avoid the bumps, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's the strong. I'll preface this by saying I don't put a lot of credence in the, like, let's call it the external influence theory that there was like like a sixth or seventh person or other parties that controlled them to do this. But if the evidence that is there, I'd say that's the biggest piece of evidence. This is the biggest, like, I don't have a good answer for it. Like, especially the way the car was left. I could still see people kind of underestimating Madruga's driving level because since that car is his baby, he kind of knows like you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
when you've driven your car for a while, like you can kind of like, it's like a part of your body. So like that part, I could find some credibility in him. Like, like Matthias is forcing him to do this, and he's like, well, I'm not gonna mess up my car, for your, we're gonna get there. So maybe, who knows? Maybe people underestimate his ability. But yeah, the way it's left is troubling. Except under the scenario, it's still troubling. But regardless, it's troubling under the scenario of how he left it. It
Okay.
must have been a really stressful situation. Now, what I will say is, while I don't put a lot of credibility to the theory, I can't say that it's impossible. It's not impossible. What I would question, though, and maybe this is good feedback in the comments, is why? Why do it? Because it doesn't look like they had anything of value on them. The car wasn't taken. There was nothing of value apparently to take. And then, like, I mean, before I get to like the only other theory I've ever heard, which was just a wacky theory, they said, well, maybe it was to help out some lady with a baby, like, because supposedly, I think it was Weir, one of them was like known, I think maybe it was Madruga, was known to like help people in need. But it's like, I don't, what I mean? Nothing ever turned up about like some lady with a baby who didn't turn up somewhere that she was supposed to.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody met them on the road and then they handed over the baby and then that person left and then, but it doesn't make sense from that perspective. I guess the only other thing that I guess might lean towards that theory is that just because a crime doesn't make sense doesn't mean it's impossible. So I know I've fallen into this trap and I see it happen all the time with these kind of cases and on YouTube and Reddit, etc. people think that, like, well, if logically there's no motive, it's impossible for it to have happened. And I think you and I both know from some of these cases that we've seen people do inexplicably stupid and destructive things that ultimately didn't pay off, but maybe in some weird way made sense at the time when they did them. And then,
Mm,
like it didn't work out, but it was going to be something. And then, like, maybe they chickened out, whatever reason, you know.
yeah.
So that's my thought on that. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it just doesn't seem likely to me.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think I personally ran out of theories because for me personally, it's either, Gary Mathias somehow instigating everything, or there being an external source that led them to do this. Now, from the points that you've made, I definitely have a sense, and I think, some of the audience members probably share this as well, that probably Gary somehow, one way or another, uh, even maybe if he wasn't like the sole cause of what happened, he was definitely like part of the reason why they did this trip into the mountains. And I think I ran out of theories. I think you have something else in the notes. So do you want to finish off the notes? Because I see some more stuff here.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the good news is I think we covered all of this, but I think that's great. It was kind of the show where we were able to kind of layer in these different theories about what happened in this case. But yeah, it just, I guess once again, it's interesting in these disappearance cases. What makes them so mysterious, like whether it's this or Chris Kremers and Lizanne Froon, or Michael Negrete, or anybody, Brian Schaefer. Something happens where somebody does something that is contrary to everybody's expectations. And if I could maybe, I guess, if we were going to kind of finish off the show with a kind of a parting note or food for thought, I would say that, you know what, when it comes to at least your own personal safety, try not to do things that are too unexpected. As much as it's good to be a little bit spontaneous, you can see where being spontaneous when there's like not a net, I guess, or when it's, there's like more at stake, it's a hazardous situation, there's bad weather. In some of these cases that we've covered, there wasn't doesn't look like the person did anything wrong. So I don't want to imply anybody did anything wrong. Something happened here though, and it just, once again, I mean, just think they wouldn't have even found that car had their local law enforcement not taken a super kind of proactive personal interest in the case. And in other cases we've seen, like, was it just last week where they were like, they didn't take it very seriously at all in the Kristen Smart case, and they lost um, a lot of time. And she, frankly, did something that was a little bit unexpected too. I don't think anybody that knew her expected her to get shit faced drunk and end up at the mercy of a bunch of strangers. Not blaming her, but that's what happened. So, you know, I guess that's my
Yeah, yeah.
my rambling closing. Yeah.
That's good, man. That's really good. So I think we all know where you're leaning. I just want to add that you've made this podcast like 10 times better than I initially anticipated it to be, because going into this episode, I didn't really have a clear idea. But now you brought up some points and you've built a really strong case, in my opinion, for Gary Mathias's involvement in the disappearance. Because he's like the only one who hasn't been found, so we don't know what happened to him. Uh, Guys, please leave a like on this episode if you enjoyed it, as always, or maybe even leave a subscribe on the YouTube channel if you don't mind doing that, if it won't clutter your like subscription list and things like that. And also leave a comment. What do you think happened, and what do you think about the case that Glenn has built for Gary Mathias? I think it's a really strong case. Like, he could have been like a prosecutioner or something like that, Glenn. So yeah, guys, definitely catch us next week. For now, we're signing out. We're going to be doing some cool cases next week. This was a fun episode. Leave your suggestions for the next cases as well in the comments. We always like reading those and putting them in our potential case, Google sheet. And yeah, we'll catch you next time. As always, stay safe and peace out.